Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate, and today we're going to be discussing the threat for winter and severe weather into parts of the middle of this week, as well as the threat for flooding in the latter parts of this week. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you all to do me a favor, go down, hit that like button, which is that thumbs up button, go subscribe if you're new, and click that notification bell so that you can be up to date on all weather content that I do, including weather videos as well as weather live streams that we do on the days of severe weather events or tropical events. Now, excuse me for stuttering a bit because it is quite early in the morning and I do have to go to work in a couple of hours, so that'll be fun. But we're still going to hammer out this video and we're going to try and tell you all what's going to be happening within the next week. But for right now, let's take a look at the Storm Prediction Center, and we'll be able to see here that over the next 3 days, the Storm Prediction Center has been very adamant that there will be no severe weather in any parts over the next 3 days. Now, it's not saying that if you do get rain that you, like, the likelihood of you getting severe weather is completely thrown out of the window. Just know that it is very unlikely. However, one thing that the Storm Prediction Center has had done is in their day 4 through 8 outlook, they have noticed our little severe weather event coming on Wednesday the 10th. Remember what I said yesterday, Wednesday the 10th. That's the day that we're going to be looking at for the potential for severe weather into southern parts of Kansas, northern parts of Oklahoma. And so if we take a look here, I won't bore you with everything that this text says. They just say that the low pressure is moving through, the cold front ejects through the plains, all that. But let's take a look at the specifics here, the cliff notes, if you will. And you can see right here, with surface dew points forecast to be in the 50s ahead of the front, instability should remain weak, which is what we found yesterday. We didn't look at the dew points, but we saw the convective available potential energy, or CAPE. And that tells us the amount of energy that is in the atmosphere, the amount of buoyant force in the atmosphere that could help develop and or sustain thunderstorms. But the thing that makes this event really interesting is they too have seen that the deep layer shear is forecasted to be strong, making the severe threat possible in spite of weak instability, which that typically happens when you have strong wind shear on events such as this one. So the potential for storms could be maximized in Oklahoma and eastern Kansas Wednesday night, where low-level flow and moisture are forecasted to be the greatest. So we've noticed that too. We've seen how the moisture has advected from the south and the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into Oklahoma and Kansas, and the Storm Prediction Center agrees that there is the potential for severe weather to impact the Central Plains here. Let's take a look at the GFS now. And I was looking earlier this morning, just woke up, couldn't get back to sleep, so I was just looking through the models, messing around, and found some interesting things. First off, before I go into the GFS specifically, for any weather enthusiasts who wonder why I just use the GFS alone, the GFS in itself is basically the only model that actually can have a general idea of how to predict severe weather. Euro, nope. Canadian, Canadian can barely even do its job correctly with the snow. And all the other models are not within range yet, so we can only rely on the GFS as of right now. So just for any of you who are curious, that is the main reason why I use this model run. But let's take a look here at the GFS. This is the mainland US view, and you can see over the next couple of days, this is Monday morning, moves on through. Tuesday morning, there seems to be a low pressure system that moves through the northern plains, but it really only gives snow for southern parts of Canada. So we're here at the Tuesday afternoon hours, and there isn't really a whole lot. I mean, you look across the board here, there's just snow in the Rockies. There's a lot of snow in California, which is to be expected around this time of year. Especially, you're going to want that with just in preparation for the summer, just in case if there's any droughts over there, you can still have water into all the lakes and the mountain ranges so that you can have extra supplies and all that. But you can take a look here. We're overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, and there is not really a whole lot. I mean, there's the low pressure system that we're talking about that's going to move through the plains into the upper Midwest. And this is where things start to get interesting. You can see how it pushes through, and remember how I talked about in the beginning of the video, I said we were going to be talking about severe and winter weather threat, and up to the north here you can see mixed precip indicated in the pink and orange, and you can also see that blue, which indicates the threat for snow into the northern plains as well. So something to keep in mind with that. But the severe weather threat, however, comes a little bit later, and you can already see this is 21Z, which is afternoon into the evening hours, more afternoon hours, like around 3 o'clock. You can see right here, there's already some precip that develops in Oklahoma and southeastern Kansas. And so you can take a look further, the line starts to elongate, and here is your cold front that pushes on through. That is exactly where the SPC stated it was. Eastern Kansas, northern Oklahoma, heading into central Oklahoma. So something to monitor with this, that this event still is going strong, and it is still pretty consistent throughout the GFS. But once this event moves on through, you can see the low pressure kind of carries along its cold front, and this right here is where we can start to get some flooding, because if you'll notice, this cold front actually kind of stalls and becomes kind of a stationary boundary. And so within the next couple of days, you can see how this massive band of precip just kind of sits over the northern Ohio Valley into the Mississippi River Valley and just kind of sits there. I'll even draw a line right here, and you can actually see that the precip just sits right in this line. Look at this. It just sits here, sits here, sits here. And you even have, in the latter stages of the week, another line of storms that kind of fire up because of a low pressure system. And look at this, more precip, even more precip that develop. And that could indicate a chance for some major flooding conditions into some specific areas and valleys. So please seek higher ground if you're in a flash flood warning. I know when some people use the word major, it seems to be kind of overhyped in some instances, and it seems a bit excessive, but it's not. This flooding may not be as bad as what happened in Kentucky, but regardless, flooding is a big deal here. You do not want to drive into flooded roadways, especially since they kind of give off this different perception to where they seem shallower than they actually are. So please keep that in mind. And with that, the GFS is also picking up this second low pressure system that's kind of going to move across the coast. And there is a cold front that develops down at the bottom here. But I've been hesitant to talk about this. I've seen this for quite a while. I've actually been looking at this for a straight week because I knew this low pressure system would kind of follow up behind the other low pressure system, since we saw, or at least I saw on Twitch when I was talking the one day, that this low pressure system kind of just carried on through behind the low pressure that formed over the Rocky Mountains, and it was just going to gradually move over the US. So right now, according to the GFS, there isn't really a whole lot on this system that could produce severe weather, but we could definitely see some gusty winds from this line, or say that we could see some gusty winds from this line that could move on through. I won't say anything about if there's going to be any tornadoes or if there's going to be any hail, because it's just too far out right now. So Friday evening into Saturday morning, as it continues to move on through, you can still see the low pressure system just carry on with its cold front. You can see the warm front carries up all the way up into the mid-Atlantic, to where you can see some isolated precip into southern south central areas of PA. I laugh at that because that's actually where I reside. And then the potential for a possible snowstorm in the Northeast, as well as some severe weather towards the coastal Carolina areas. So something to keep in mind with all of that, that that is a possibility, but it is still relatively far out. So I would take this amount with a grain of salt, but I would still watch this as it continues to move on through. All right, let's get a bit further in depth as to what we can expect on Wednesday, all the typical conditions that we want to see here. So temperatures, let me get this up here real quickly in Fahrenheit. We'll move all the way up to Wednesday, which is, okay, so this is overnight Wednesday here. You can see the temperatures for the latter stages of Wednesday do get up into about the 70s, maybe even 80s in some spots in Texas, but you know, it does seem to be localized to around 70 to 80 degrees around the severe weather area. I'll actually change this to black now so that you can all see it a whole lot easier. But in and around this area, that is the severe weather area that we've been focusing on for the past couple of days. It does seem that the temperatures do get up to around 70 to 80. Dew points, let me snag that over here real quickly. The dew points are kind of iffy here. Actually, I like to use the GFS on Pivotal Weather for dew points. So if you would give me a second, it better describes as to what the dew points actually look like with contours. So let me pull this up real quickly. There we are. Okay, so as we get into Wednesday here, you can see how the dew points start to get into the mid 50s here, especially into Oklahoma. Lower 50s into Kansas, but this is overnight Tuesday into Wednesday. And then as it continues to move on through, you can see how the dew points get into the upper 50s, almost breaching 60 here in some areas of northern Oklahoma. And actually, it does breach 60 in some instances. This is 0Z, which is around 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. And you can see dews do get up into the 60s here. So that is something to keep in mind, that moisture is decent and that it's not overly poor for this event in retrospect. So dew points, ooh, actually it does even, you can even see the little blue here that you would see on the contours down at the bottom. I'll change this back to red again because we're dealing with pivotal weather here. You can see how the dews do get into that little blue right here, which on the color code map at the bottom, you can see that does indicate 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So the conditions across the board is looking favorable for little pop-up showers of severe weather. We're going to take a look at the surface-based CAPE and be able to show you all, as I said, love pivotal weather with their contours, so they can best describe what all is happening. And you can see that there are some areas that can get up to around 1,000 joules per kilogram, maybe even 1,200 joules per kilogram. So that it is relatively modest for moisture, especially for events like this in March. But with the amount of wind shear that you get with these types of storms, you don't really need overly a whole lot. As I was saying yesterday, around 750 to 2,000 joules per kilogram is around the amount of CAPE that you would need in order for you to get supercells or just thunderstorms in general. So you do get above 1,000 here, and that is, in my opinion, good enough to where you could get a line of storms that could rumble through. But the Storm Prediction Center also mentioned that Kansas could also get some of these storms too, and they are at around the 600 joules per kilogram area, and they could see some little pop-up showers. Not really sure if they're going to be tornadic or not. It's going to be really hard to say, especially with that little of energy. But Oklahoma does seem to be given the go for some sort of pop-up showers that could be severe. Now, we were talking about the wind shear and how it was a bit excessive. And so we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at the 500 millibar heights, which 500 millibars is a specific height in the sky. So the best way I can describe it is I'm going to take a sounding right here, okay? And if you don't know what a sounding is, basically if you imagine a weather balloon being lofted up and a satellite is looking at that weather balloon, it tracks where it goes and the conditions around it. So you can see a photograph describes where it goes. It can go up, down, left, right, squiggly loop-de-loops or whatever. And then the lines right here, these are the conditions. This entire box is the conditions that the weather balloon sees as it goes up higher and higher into the atmosphere. Now here's 500 millibars right here. This is a specific height, which is just below 6 kilometers up in the sky. So if you get that kind of frame of sense, it's around 6 kilometers. It's not always below. It's not always above. Well, actually, for the most part, it is typically below, but it depends upon where it is, depending upon the pressure. So it's a specific height in the sky around 6 kilometers. So let's take a look at it at around Wednesday. And you can see the wind shear right here as it moves up through is around 50, mid 50s to upper 60s in knots, which would translate to about 65 to 70 miles per hour, which is actually pretty high for the amount of wind shear that's screaming through here. Typically, in order to be considering severe storms, you would have around 45 to 50 knots, which is around 50 to 55 miles per hour. And this is just 10 knots, maybe even 15 knots higher than that. This is midday on Wednesday, or actually early morning on Wednesday. And then as it continues to move on through, you can actually see the wind shear actually accelerates a little bit. You can see how it gets up into the low 60s, into the mid 60s as well. So 70 to 80 miles per hour in some of these areas, the wind shear could get up to. So this is indeed strong wind shear indicated in some of the darker purples. Now this red up here, you might be asking, well, this is some strong wind shear up here too. This is all in the red, and you can indicate that it is around 80 to 90 knots, which is around 90 to 100 miles per hour. Well, this, if you remember what we've been saying, and the SPC that said on day 4, is that the severe weather threat is localized into more of Oklahoma, Kansas, and I'll even say Missouri. And so because the wind shear is all the way up this far north, this wind shear will not impact any of the severe weather down south. So something to keep in mind with that just because you see all these, higher numbers doesn't mean it always correlates with the severe weather that is occurring. Now, one thing I do want to check out real quickly, we're going to take a look at the supercell composite, which is basically a combination of all sorts of factors that goes into severe weather. And, well, actually, we're going to take a look at the model trend and see what has happened over the past couple of model runs. So, let's see. This is frame 90. We'll go over here, and we'll take a look at the model trend. And we can take a look and see what the GFS has done over the past couple of model runs. Because our last video was yesterday morning. So there's been 4 model runs that have went through to show the opinion of the GFS at that point in time. So you can see on the 5th and around the afternoon, you can see the supercell composite is around 5 to 10. Excuse me, I'm getting a little parched here. So 5 to 10. Prior to that, it wasn't really a whole lot. You can see in the earlier model runs around the 4th, it wasn't all too much. But then getting into the 6th, you can see that it becomes just a little bit more intense. You can see it gets into the double digits. You can also see that there's a little bit of yellow right here, which is pretty interesting. You can also see that it also moves a bit further south. You can see, I know I'm saying you can see a whole lot, but the supercell composite starts out to about southern Kansas, and it kind of ends at about west central Oklahoma. Not exactly panhandle western Oklahoma, but west central Oklahoma. As you continue to move on to the model runs, you can see last night it uptrended big time. You can see that this giant yellow area, the largest yellow area that we've seen in these model runs so far, appear in southern Kansas, northern Oklahoma. But then this latest model run, it went back to normal, I would say. not really normal, but consistent with all the other model runs, into the event being localized to a bit more into Oklahoma. So uh, the GFS is still saying that this event could still happen and that there's still a widespread chance that there could be some severe storms, but still something to keep in mind with all of that. I'm gonna take a sounding real quickly here just to see what all is happening. The hodograph is still curling off to the side, which usually when you see a hodograph kind of curl around off to the right like this, this can indicate that there could be a chance for some tornadic activity, and the possible hazard type agrees with that, saying Tor, or short for tornado. The Cape, if you see right here, it says Cape. Surface at this sounding says 944, which, as I said, is okay for smaller supercells or smaller cells to form out. The capping inversion is relatively high here, so that's the only thing that a limiting factor could be in play here, but still something to keep in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that in some areas the capping inversion could be less, so you could have some storms that could initiate. But the other thing here for you weather enthusiasts is that the sounding is a bit elevated, so you could have some elevated thunderstorms that could produce hail. Not really as much of a tornado threat in some of these storms, but it'd be more of a gusty wind and hail threat. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the winter weather aspect of this, which would be up into the north. So let's go to the let's go actually to north central here. There we go. So we'll take a look at the winter aspect here. We'll use the 10-to-1 snow total for right now. We'll look at Shear later. And the GFS has been pretty adamant in saying that there could be some snowfall amounts across portions of Wyoming heading into South Dakota, to the little tip of North Dakota, the southeastern side, as well as through Minnesota. So Minneapolis, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a couple flurries, but it won't be as big of a snowstorm as you guys typically see, which is the good news there. Sleet, you could also see a little bit of sleet heading in from South Dakota into Minnesota and Wisconsin, so north of Minneapolis, or I think that's north of Minneapolis, if not around Minneapolis. You could see little amounts of sleet, as well as freezing rain, which that will be localized more towards northern Wisconsin. So let's actually see if I can get a better view here for you all. Upper Midwest. Here we go. This is exactly what we wanted to see. You can see that freezing rain also extends into the northern parts of Michigan as well, or at least the northwestern parts of Michigan. So if you live over there, you guys could expect some freezing rain, and upwards to around a quarter, maybe even a half of inch at some spots. So definitely something you want to keep in mind there. All right, there's going to be one more thing that we want to talk about before we end the video here, and that is the flooding risk that I mentioned earlier. And this will mainly occur in the Ohio River Valley, which basically is a giant consensus of a bunch of different states. So this is going to be pretty widespread here. But we'll take a look at the precipitation, and we'll take a look at the 12-hour, because the 24-hour, in my opinion, doesn't really do it a whole lot of justice, as I should say. And you can see this is on a Wednesday evening right here. This low pressure system already creates a vast amount of precip across the board here. Whether it's snow, whether it's rain, whether it's freezing rain, it's still creating a vast amount of precip across the board here. But then this is where things start to get pretty sketchy. You can see the line of storms that begin to initiate in Oklahoma and Kansas, which is what we were talking about earlier. But then that line starts to consolidate, and this is where things start to get pretty interesting. Mainly because you can see this giant band of rain that extends from central Missouri all the way up into South Bend, Indiana, and you'll see further in the next couple of frames here. into northern parts of Ohio. In some of these instances, you can get rain in upwards of 2.5 inches, which, if you have some runoff, some aerial flooding, you can bet your buns that they'll be closing roads up there due to all of that flooding. So, as I mentioned before, you really do not want to drive into flooded roadways. I would not risk it whatsoever. But as I mentioned before, you can definitely see some flooding into some of these areas. Central Illinois into northern Indiana and northern Ohio. There is some areas that are south of that could get more amounts, half an inch of rain down south of Peoria into Indianapolis and stuff like that, as well as Columbus getting into the action here with a quarter of an inch of rain, maybe a little bit more, depending upon how far south it goes. But then this is the thing that I was kind of worrying about, where the second low pressure comes by, and you can see it starts to fire up more rain over the areas that already had rain from the previous low pressure. So you can see again some rainfall amounts that extend from Oklahoma down into central Missouri, into St. Louis, down into southern parts of Illinois, into Indiana, and like Indianapolis, as well as Columbus and Dayton. So something to keep in mind there, that you can see some rainfall amounts if you're in Missouri in upwards of 4 inches. 4 inches of accumulated rain. So that in itself is pretty crazy. And as I mentioned before, some areas in Illinois and Indiana, you won't be out of the clear, even though it'll be from Friday into Saturday. So the time frame for the flooding will most likely be from Thursday morning all the way up into around Friday and Saturday, and possibly further into the weekend on Sunday, and maybe even Monday. So that's going to be it from me, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you're new, hit that notification bell, share it with friends and family. That way they'd be able to look at this forecast and also hopefully, keyword hopefully, enjoy my content. So yeah, hit the notification bell. As I said before, you do not want to miss any of my content, whether it's videos or live streams that we do on live severe weather days, which we will most likely attempt to try and stream severe weather in Oklahoma and Kansas on Wednesday evening. But if the event does look pretty poor, then we will probably not stream. But for the chances of us streaming, there is a decent chance that we could stream on Wednesday evening. But I'll let you guys know when the time comes if we could be streaming or not. So that's going to be it. My name's Nate. I'll go by Hockey Boy Nate, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.